John Hook's Newsmaker starts now.
Thanks for joining us for Newsmaker. We begin with the results of the Iowa caucuses and take a look forward now to New Hampshire. The New Hampshire primary on Tuesday. I'll be there bringing you the situation on the ground in New Hampshire, the candidates, and the results. So let's start with longtime political analyst and pollster Mike O'Neill. He joins us here on Newsmaker. Good to see you.
Good to be here.
It's an interesting year. However, did Trump make it less interesting on Monday night with a pretty decisive victory in Iowa?
It's hard to imagine how things could have been better for him. There were only two questions going into the night in Iowa. One is, does he exceed 50%, which he did? And the second good thing that happened for him is that he now has two viable candidates against him to split the anti-Trump vote. The longer that goes, the longer he is basically unbeatable. If DeSantis had come in a poor third and been knocked out, then we'd have Haley and Trump head to head, and she might give him a race. To the extent that there's an anti-Trump vote out there, she can maybe make a case for it. It's a tough haul because the indications are that that's not the case with DeSantis voters. They'll probably mostly go to Trump, but she can at least make a case.
Michael, how did the 50% number become a thing? Was it Trump raising those expectations? Because nobody had even approached that before in Iowa. Nobody's gotten 50%. Nobody's been even close.
Yeah. Well, because there's been multiple candidates all on the same playing field. I think one thing to remember about this election, Trump is a quasi-incumbent. We've never had this before. Okay, he's not president, but he was president. The last time you had somebody who was president run for president was Teddy Roosevelt, and there were not any primaries nor any caucuses anywhere.
Right. It was a party function to decide.
And he wasn't even in the party then.
Okay, so going into New Hampshire, it appears that is much more fertile ground for Nikki Haley because she's got this independent streak. That played well, you remember, with John McCain in 2000, 2008.
Yep.
His brand of politics really resonated there. She might have a play. It's possible, right?
If she were to win, it would be astounding, and there'd be a lot of rethinking. If she comes in a very close second, she might be able to spend it. As you mentioned before, before we turned on the cameras, Bill Clinton parlayed a third-place finish into comeback kid.
Yes.
So, that you usually aren't able to do that. She has to greatly exceed expectation because this is one of her best states. There's a lot of independent voters in New Hampshire. There's some in Iowa, but New Hampshire, it's a goodly number, and it's not the Trump fertile ground.
Right. Okay. So for DeSantis, Iowa, he finishes kind of surprisingly second because everybody was thinking that Haley was going to finish second. You would think that would give him a springboard, but he has been kind of nowhere in New Hampshire. He's visited the place not that many times. He's polling around 5%, and he started making trips to South Carolina, stop number 3 on the primary train. That was an interesting play. Tell me what you think is going on there.
I think it's a mistake. I can see a tiny little sliver of possibility for Nikki Haley. For DeSantis, I don't see how he can pull this out. He's going to be an also-ran in New Hampshire. I don't see how you parlay that into a victory in South Carolina.
Does he know this at this point? In other words, you finished second in Iowa above Haley. You would think you're now the 1 and 2 with Trump. But that doesn't seem to be the way everybody's looking.
Remember the last guy to sit out some primaries and do this was the New York mayor.
Yes, he did.
Who said, I'll wait until Florida. By the time it got to Florida, it was all over.
That's right.
So,
and John McCain, again, back to McCain in 2000, he did not campaign in Iowa because it was not the right fit for him. His opposition to ethanol subsidies, there were a bunch of reasons why. Same thing in 2008. He really didn't do anything in Iowa. He loaded up on New Hampshire. But now I'm looking at the landscape for DeSantis, and I'm trying to figure out the path forward.
I don't see a path to victory for him. And as I said, with Nikki Haley, I see only a sliver of hope.
Okay.
I mean, this was a phenomenal night for Donald Trump. Everything fell into place perfectly. He has two remaining opponents who are going to split the anti-Trump vote.
And again, in Iowa, the counter-argument has been the total electorate that turned out, Republican caucus goers. This is a microcosm of a microcosm. It's 100,000 people, right? And 50,000 of them basically voted for Donald Trump. And this is casting the trajectory of the whole next 3 months?
And New Hampshire's not a whole lot better.
Okay, so what are we doing here?
Well, the Democrats fixed this, but they're starting in South Carolina, and they say we shouldn't have those same two states dominating the process every single year.
Because of demographic concerns.
Yeah,
And that's been a
and
long
because
time
of size. And why, it's okay once in a while, but why every time? There's no reason other than tradition. In fact, it always used to be New Hampshire. In '76, Jimmy Carter made Iowa
That's
thing.
right.
And he took the tiny little caucus in Iowa, turned it into a thing, and used that to propel his status, which was Jimmy Who,
Right.
until Iowa, he made himself a viable candidate.
Okay, so on this primary caucus business, I actually love it. I mean, as a journalist, it's really fun to cover.
Great theater.
But there's another reason I like it, is that the politicians can't just do a media buy and win the election. They have to literally meet people. The old joke from Mo Udall.
Right.
What do you think? What do you think in Iowa? What do you think of Mo Udall?
I don't know. He's only been over to dinner 2 or 3 times.
Exactly. That's the thing. You can't really get that anywhere else. And it's nice to see these candidates actually have to meet people where they are. There's a charm in it.
And that's going to end very quickly. When you go to South Carolina and all the
Exactly.
other bigger states, it's going to be all mass media.
So if we were to go down the road right now, the Democrats are going, they've turned Iowa into a mail-in voting thing for about a month.
Yep.
Results to be released on Super Tuesday. New Hampshire, Biden isn't even on the ticket there. So they're urging people to write him in.
Yeah.
This is kind of a mess, and you start to wonder, are we heading down the road where the caucuses and primaries early are going to change?
Well, here's the thing. Nobody wants to say, don't start with Iowa and New Hampshire unless you know it's going to happen. It's kind of like the 18-year-old vote years ago. Everybody was against it until the day it became inevitable, and then, believe it or not, every single politician in the world was in favor of it.
Sure.
You don't want to diss Iowa and New Hampshire if they're still going to occupy those front places. So it has to be changed by kind of faceless
Do you
bureaucrats.
think they still have a place and a role, or do you think it's oversized for what they are?
Well, I think that in the Republican side, when those are first, those are significant. We're talking about it. We just shifted the agenda because of the results of Iowa, and with New Hampshire right on the heels of that, if those two states go in the same direction, which they very often don't, if they go in the same direction, you kind of get a bandwagon effect, and somebody can roll the whole process.
Okay, okay. So one more thing, and then we'll move on from this. Donald Trump is facing 91 criminal indictments. The indictment play, I think Democrats thought would knock him off the playing field. It seemed to only bolster his appeal to voters who may have walked away from him, actually, and said, I can't do that anymore. They're watching this. They think it's a political persecution. They're flocking back to him.
Among Republicans, for sure. What we don't know is if he ends up with convictions, will there be a handful of independent or waffling voters that walk away from him? There was polling that suggests, when that question was asked, 5 to 7% said, well, if he's convicted, I won't vote for him then. I tend to think that number is vastly inflated. People are pretty good at telling you who they're going to vote for. They're not very good at telling you what they would do if something happens that hasn't happened yet. So I tend to think that number is vastly over, but if it's only 1%, it could still determine the outcome of the election. We don't know. We know amongst Republicans, though.
Let's move on to the Arizona Senate race. Do you believe Kyrsten Sinema is running?
Is she running? And well, as of right now, we haven't seen a whole lot of action. She's collected a lot of money. That's dried up, but she's got, I think, $8 million in the bank. I think that she does not want to be embarrassed, and if the polls continue to show her coming in third, I would not be at all surprised to see her drop out.
I'm just observing it. If she's running, she's a reluctant candidate. She doesn't seem to be making the noises that you would be making, I would think, this early. Now, granted, things can change. If an immigration law gets, or overhaul gets passed, that she's been really working on. She's been a big piece of that. That could give her a springboard to say, this is what I'm actually doing, right?
Yeah, that would be a significant accomplishment if it has her fingerprints on it.
But she seems like she's not running to me. I've said this before. I'm starting to wonder if she's actually going to do it.
Well, she's the ultimate pragmatist. If she's looking at the lay of the land and doesn't see a path to victory, I don't think she wants to stick around and come in third.
Is there a path to victory for an independent in Arizona?
You know, if you have to paint both your opponents as extremist of the left and of the right, respectively.
Now, she may be able to make that play, actually, because Ruben Gallego's voting record's way over here. We know Carrie Lake is extremely on the Trump train and in that camp.
Yeah.
That leaves a slice.
I don't see that as Gallego's image right now. You have to make that case.
Okay.
So
you think he's been a pragmatist, a moderate?
No,
He's not a moderate,
you're
he's
right
very-
about the voting record,
Okay.
but I don't think he's perceived as outside of the mainstream of American politics
Got it,
right now.
okay.
But she would have to make that case in order to try to create a big enough middle to have a chance.
Okay, the legislature right now, still in control of Republicans in the House and Senate. This is a state legislature. That kind of hamstrings Katie Hobbs to a great degree of what she
Absolutely.
can accomplish.
Absolutely.
Do you see the legislature starting to shift, that there may be a shift there?
Well, this is an all or nothing phenomena because, you know, there was years ago when Napolitano was governor.
Right.
She was facing almost a 2-to-1 Republican legislature, and they were more willing to work with her than the current legislature with a 1-vote Republican majority in each House is, because of the nature of who the Republicans are. There were a lot of moderate Republicans in the Napolitano day. They're pretty much MAGA Trump folks, with a couple of exceptions in the legislature, who are not inclined to compromise. The observation I make about the legislature, it's kind of all or nothing. If the Democrats were to take one house back, I don't think it would make any difference because we have split government right now. We would still have split government. The big enchilada is the trifecta. That's if you have the governorship and both houses, then you can govern and do what you want.
This
Doug
is
Ducey had that.
Ducey had this, exactly.
And so we're split, and whether it's with one houses or two of the legislature, I don't think that makes any difference. And by the way, that's a very tough call. That means 2 seats in each house, and there's only about 3 or 4 competitive districts anyway.
Yeah.
So that is threading the needle perfectly, and a lot of it will have to do with candidate selection.
And it may not be a great Democrat year. You don't know how it'll shape up.
But in the legislature, we've noticed that people are willing to make choices based on individuals. They're also going to look at candidates.
That's true. Great analysis, Michael O'Neill. Appreciate it. And we'll have you back and we'll talk about the congressional races.
You bet.
Next. Okay, Michael O'Neill. We're back in a minute on Newsmaker.